Hey everybody. So this video is going to go over the PowerPoint for evaluative writing, which is the first sub-tab in the Writing to Evaluate tab in the Week 6 module. So basically, we are starting to talk about essay number 2. I know that might seem crazy because we're not technically finished with essay number 1. You guys are still working on getting final drafts ready. But we have to keep the train moving. So we're going to go ahead and at least learn about this essay and start getting a feel for what the second essay is all about. So that's what this PowerPoint covers, is everything that you need to know about writing to evaluate. So you'll see if you're going through the PowerPoint, the second slide, it says evaluative writing. What is it? So the purpose of an evaluation essay is to demonstrate the overall quality of something, or maybe the lack of quality. It could be a product, a business, a place, a service, an item. If you're, like a car or shoes or purses or makeup, video games, pretty much anything that you could review. So that's another way to kind of think about this essay. We call it evaluative writing, but honestly, all you're doing is writing a review of something. So anything that could be reviewed, which is a lot of different things in our lives, that's what we're going to be working with. So it's the purpose of the essay is to try to convince the reader to either partake in the thing you're reviewing, buy it, experience it, go there, whatever the thing is that you are reviewing. If you are giving it a good review, you're hoping that your reader will then want to go out and experience it as well. If you're giving a bad review, then obviously you're trying to warn your readers and you're hoping that they learn from your lesson and don't go do that thing. So that's essentially what we're talking about here. So it is an opinion piece, right? You are giving your opinion of something, but you are also taking on the role of expert in the field of this subject matter. So you don't want it to come off as opinionated, right? You are still wanting to sound very objective and level-headed and reliable, right? And credible. So that's what we're going for. We're going to go through the elements that are expected in this type of essay. So thinking back to rhetorical patterns that we learned about in week 2, we're going to go through what the reader would expect when coming across this type of essay, which means these are the things that you want to make sure you include or accomplish in the final draft of your essay. So some of the things that we're going to look at is how to address the subject, the topic that you're going to write about. Something called criteria. We're going to talk about how to make sure you have a judgment included, that you're going to have supporting evidence for what kind of tone would be best for the type of essay. And we're going to talk about patterns of organization for the essay. So that's what the PowerPoint covers. So the first thing you want to do in the introduction is you want to make sure your reader is absolutely clear on what the subject is, right? You want to describe it in some detail, but only things that would be important to the reader in order to understand the evaluation that you're going to give. You might provide background information on the topic, but not necessarily, especially if you're picking a topic that everybody is pretty familiar with already. So if you do give any kind of information on it, it's probably going to be pretty brief. You only want to provide enough information to allow your readers to, be able to move on and understand what you're talking about. You want the emphasis to be on your authoritative voice. Yes, this is your opinion, but you are going to state it as fact, right? So you're not just going to say, I think Applebee's is a great restaurant. You're going to say Applebee's is a great restaurant, or the opposite. I don't think Applebee's is all that great. I think Applebee's pretty crappy. No, Applebee's is horrible, right? So it's an opinion, but you're going to frame it as if it is fact. You're going to use the supporting evidence to back that up, right? So you describe the subject, or at least clarify exactly what your subject is in the beginning. The other thing you need to have in the beginning are what we call criteria. And this is the whole essay pretty much hinges upon the criteria. So what do we mean by criteria? It's what the ideal would be for this topic. So I always tell students to imagine when you're at a job, and every 6 months or once a year, you receive an evaluation from your boss, right? A yearly review. When you go in, they probably have like a sheet of paper or something that they're looking at and going through all the different things that are expected of someone performing your job. So let's say that there are 10 of you doing that job. All 10 of you have the same exact evaluation that your boss is looking at. You don't get different criteria for each person, right? This is the job. This is how it's supposed to be done. Now we're going to go through each employee and check off where they rate on each of these categories. That's what criteria are. So for instance, a restaurant. What do you look for in a good restaurant? That's your criteria. Good food, good service, cleanliness, right? You would expect every restaurant to have high marks in all 3 of those categories for you to consider it a good restaurant to eat at. Those 3 things are your criteria. They are the standard, and you're going to pick a specific topic and evaluate it against those standards. How does it measure up in these areas, right? You have to have very clear, well-defined criteria that you're using to review the topic you've chosen. Those criteria become your main points for the essay, right? So I've chosen such and such restaurant. Now I'm going to show you and provide examples of how the food is good, right? And then I'm going to move on to the next main point. Now I'm going to give you supporting evidence on how the service is good. And then I'm going to move on to the third main point. Now I'm going to give you specific examples of how clean the restaurant is. So the criteria not only determine how the topic will be evaluated, but they also determine your main points and the organization of the essay. They're so critical to this. And we will be reading examples just like we did with the narrative. So once you have established the criteria, the categories you're going to use to evaluate your topic, the other thing you want to make sure you do in that introduction is you need to make it very clear if you're giving it a good evaluation or a bad evaluation, right? Don't be on the fence. Don't pick something that, it's good here but bad there. No, pick something where you can be 100% on either side of the fence. It's fantastic or it's horrible. Don't go in the middle. But make sure that judgment is crystal clear in the introduction. And honestly, the judgment and the criteria form your thesis statement, right? Applebee's is a horrible restaurant because the food is bad, the service is horrible, and it's never clean, right? I'm not saying that's true. I'm sure it is for some Applebee's. But the judgment and the criteria become your thesis statement. So if you understand how important the criteria are, and you have very precise, focused criteria, and you make sure you include your judgment in that sentence, your thesis statement for this essay kind of writes itself, right? But you got to have that criteria in place or it kind of all falls apart. So those are the things you accomplish in your introduction. make sure your topic, make sure your subject is very clear to your reader. Provide any kind of background information that might be necessary, might not be very much needed at all. Make sure that you have your thesis statement that includes your judgment and your criteria. So you move on to the body of the essay then. You're going to take each of those criteria and you are going to provide supporting evidence for each one of them. This is based on your personal experience. Do not go out and do research on whatever topic you've chosen. It is not a research paper in any way, shape, or form. I do tell students though that if you want to use it as an excuse to like go out to a restaurant or go buy something so that you can evaluate it, that's totally your choice, but it's not necessary. So having said that, if I'm not asking you to go out and do any kind of research now, it's based on your past experience. You want to make sure you choose a topic that you're very familiar with, that you have enough memory of or enough familiarity with, that you can come up with enough examples to support each of your criteria. All right, so base it on personal experience. Give us specific examples. And the essays that we're going to read for essay number 2, the sample essays, they do a fabulous job of giving specific examples for supporting evidence. So you'll get a better feel for that when you read the samples. The tone throughout the piece, you can add a little humor if you want. Don't go overboard though. You can add a little sarcasm if you want, but again, don't go overboard. You don't want to have it sound like this gushing, glowing review where people are going to wonder if you're getting paid to say all these good things. But you also don't want it to sound like a rant, right? You want it to sound very objective, very level-headed, that you are a sane person whose word can be trusted and that you are not overly emotional about it one way or the other, right? Now, it's not just, you're still injecting your personal experience and your personal touch on it, but you just emotionally, in terms of the tone, you don't want to go too far to either extreme, right? So the organization, obviously, you've got your introduction where you're going to grab your reader's attention in some way. You're going to introduce your subject and provide any kind of background information that might be necessary. And then you're going to present your thesis statement, which is your judgment plus your criteria. Easy enough. The body paragraphs. The first body paragraph should correspond to the first criteria you listed in the thesis statement. And it might take more than one paragraph to get through that criteria. It just depends on how many examples you're giving and whatnot. But your second main point should then match up with the second criteria you listed in the thesis statement. The third main point should match up with the third criteria you listed. See what I'm going with here? And then keep following that pattern if you have more than 3 criteria. 3 is kind of the magic number. It's not, absolutely mandatory that you have to have 3 criteria. Sometimes you can get away with 2, but remember, I'm looking for a fully developed essay here, 3 to 4 pages. So you want to make sure that you have enough to discuss within the body of the essay. I've had some that have 4 and 5 criteria. Actually, I think one of the sample essays, at least one of them, has more than 3. But 3 is kind of a magic number. It kind of, is a good guideline, but it's not set in stone. But however many you have, just make sure that the order you list them in the thesis statement is the same order you discuss them in the body of the essay. Totally up to you what that order is. Just make sure it matches up. So that is the general idea of essay number 2. You're going to pick a topic that you can review. We're going to read some sample essays. We've got 2 that are movie reviews. We will be reading those. Those are in the first batch. So the first essays 1 and 2 of the first 3. One is a Harry Potter review, and the other one is that student sample that we looked at with topic sentences, the one on the movie Halloween. We're going to look at that a little more in depth this time. I choose those two examples because students gravitate towards movie reviews, but they're not easy to execute. So I give you two really good examples. That way you can decide if it's something you want to try to tackle. The third one is a video game review. It's not the best of essays, but I still use it for students because it allows you to see a different type of subject matter. And then in the next week, after that, the second batch of essays, we have 2 restaurant reviews and then a review of a church. Restaurant reviews are the majority of subjects that I get for this essay. Once students read those samples and we do a journal entry on it as well, students really gravitate towards that one. But you could review a school, you could review a car, a cell phone, any type of electronic. Just keep in mind though that we're not talking about a little blurb like, you know, in the Amazon reviews, right? We're talking about a well-developed 3 to 4 page essay. So the topics are limitless. Just make sure you pick something that will give you enough, you know, information that will give you enough to write that kind of an essay and that you are familiar enough with so that you can fill in the supporting evidence and not have to do any kind of research. So if you have any questions at this point, of course, get in touch with me, but I'm hoping that reading through the batches of sample essays will help you get a better feel for essay number 2. But if you need anything, let me know.